It was one of those warm Saturdays when the sky looked clear and everything felt calm. David had promised his son, Ryan, a trip to the mall that weekend. Ryan had been saving up his allowance for a pair of sneakers he'd wanted for months. So that morning, they hopped into David's old pickup truck, joking around like they always did. "Dad, just don't embarrass me in the store this time," Ryan laughed. David smiled, shaking his head. "You mean like when I asked if those sneakers came with training wheels?" Ryan groaned. "Exactly like that." They both laughed as they pulled into the mall parking lot. It was a good day, or at least it started that way. Inside, the mall was busy but not crowded. The smell of pretzels and coffee hung in the air. David loved watching people. Parents juggling shopping bags, kids begging for ice cream, teenagers huddled in corners laughing about something on their phones. It reminded him how peaceful civilian life could be, far from the noise and tension he'd known years ago. They made their way to the shoe store, and Ryan immediately disappeared down one of the aisles, his excitement obvious. David took a seat on the bench by the mirrors, scrolling through his phone. He was proud of how responsible Ryan had become, polite, focused, and nothing like some of the other kids who thought the world owed them something. A few minutes later, David noticed 2 mall security guards walking past the store. At first, he didn't think much of it, but then one of them stopped, peered inside, and pointed toward Ryan. David frowned slightly. Ryan was standing near the display, trying on a pair of sneakers. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, the guards came closer. One was a tall, broad man with a buzz cut, the kind of guy who liked to look intimidating. The other was younger, probably new on the job, with a nervous energy about him. They exchanged a few words before stepping into the store. David straightened up, curious but calm. The taller guard walked right up to Ryan. "Hey, kid," he said sharply. "Empty your pockets." Ryan froze, confused. "What? You heard me," the guard interrupted. "We saw you messing around with that display. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." David stood immediately, his stomach tightening. "Excuse me," he said, walking over. "Is there a problem here?" The guard turned to him with an impatient look. "Stay back, sir. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me if you're talking to my son like that," David replied evenly. "What's going on?" The younger guard spoke up. "We got a call from the store next door," said a teenager matching his description might have pocketed something. David looked at Ryan, who shook his head quickly. "Dad, I didn't take anything." David turned back to the guards. "You can check him if you need to, but he didn't steal. You're making a mistake." But the taller guard wasn't listening. He motioned for Ryan to move away from the display. His tone wasn't just firm, it was aggressive. Other shoppers had begun to glance over, whispering to each other. David could feel his pulse quicken. Not out of fear, but out of frustration. He took a slow breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "Listen," he said. "If you think there's been a theft, call the store manager. Don't talk to my kid like he's a criminal." The guard gave him a hard stare. "Sir, step aside. This is mall property. We can handle it." Ryan looked scared now. "Dad, I didn't do anything," he said softly. "I know, son," David said, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're fine." The taller guard didn't like that. "Sir, I said back off." "I'm not interfering," David said steadily, "but you will speak to him respectfully." A small crowd was starting to form outside the store. People were pulling out phones. David noticed it, the quiet pressure of eyes watching, but he kept his voice calm. He'd been in much worse situations before. This wasn't the place to lose his temper. The younger guard hesitated. "Maybe we should get the store manager," he muttered to his partner. But the older one shook his head. "No, we've got this." He turned back to Ryan. "Empty your pockets now or I'll call for backup." Ryan looked at his dad helplessly. David took a deep breath. "You can call whoever you want," he said firmly. "But before you do, you're going to apologize to my son when you find out you're wrong." Something in his voice made the younger guard pause. It wasn't loud or angry. It was steady, commanding. the kind of tone that came from years of knowing when to speak and when to stand your ground. The tall guard didn't back down, but his confidence faltered for a second. He hadn't expected pushback, especially not from a quiet-looking man in jeans and a faded t-shirt. David could feel old instincts stirring inside him. Not aggression, discipline, awareness, control. Every sound around him became sharper. The shuffling of feet, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint tap of someone recording on a phone. Then the store manager arrived, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone surprised. The younger guard pointed at Ryan. "Possible shoplifting." The manager looked confused. "From here? That's impossible. I've been watching the cameras. Nobody's taken anything." The words hit like a spark in the silence that followed. David looked at his son, then at the guards. Ryan let out a shaky sigh of relief. The tall guard's jaw tightened. "You sure?" he asked. The manager crossed her arms. "Completely. And you just made a scene in front of customers." David didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on the guards' faces said enough. The older one mumbled something under his breath, motioning for his partner to follow. As they walked out of the store, the younger guard glanced back at David, his expression uneasy. David turned to Ryan. "You okay?" Ryan nodded, though he still looked shaken. "Yeah, I think so." "Good," David said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong." As they stepped out of the store, people still stared. Some nodded in quiet support. Others whispered, wondering what had really happened. David put his arm around his son and guided him toward the food court. Inside, he could feel that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came when someone crossed a line they shouldn't have. He'd kept his cool this time, but deep down he knew this wasn't over, because sometimes people didn't realize who they were dealing with, not until it was too late. And those guards? They had just picked on the wrong dad. After leaving the shoe store, David and Ryan sat down in the food court. Neither of them said much at first. Ryan was quiet, staring at his drink while David watched people walk by. The smell of pizza and fried food filled the air, but neither of them felt hungry anymore. Ryan finally spoke, his voice low. "Dad, why did they do that? I didn't even do anything." David sighed, rubbing his hands together. "Sometimes, son, people jump to conclusions. They think they know who you are just by how you look or where you're standing. It's not fair, but it happens." Ryan frowned. "But they didn't even ask first. They just accused me." "I know," David said. "And that's why I stepped in." Ryan nodded, still upset. "You were calm the whole time. I don't know how you did that." David smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've dealt with worse situations than 2 mall guards." Ryan looked at him curiously. "You mean from when you were in the Marines?" David nodded but didn't elaborate. He didn't talk about those years much. Not because he was ashamed, far from it, but because some memories were better left where they belonged, in the past. Before David could say more, a shadow fell over their table. He looked up and saw the 2 guards again. The tall one stood with his arms crossed, the younger one a few steps behind, looking uncomfortable. "Sir," the taller guard said in a stiff voice, "we need to talk." David looked at him steadily. "About what?" "I think we already did." The guard's jaw tightened. "We don't appreciate being disrespected in front of customers." Ryan's eyebrows shot up. "You were the one yelling at me." "Ryan," David said softly, putting a hand on his son's arm. He turned back to the guard. "Nobody disrespected you. I just asked you to treat my son fairly." The younger guard shifted nervously. "Maybe we should just..." But the older guard cut him off. "We've got rules here. You don't get to tell us how to do our job." David leaned back in his chair, keeping his tone calm. "I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm telling you that you crossed a line." The guard took a step closer. "You think you can talk to us like that because you're some tough guy?" David tilted his head slightly. "No, I talk like that because I'm a father." People nearby began to take notice again. Phones were out. The younger guard looked uncomfortable, realizing things were about to draw attention for a second time. "Look," David said, still calm. "Let's not make this worse. We're just trying to enjoy our day." But the tall guard wouldn't let it go. His voice rose slightly. "You think you can just walk away after disrespecting mall security?" At that point, the mall supervisor, a woman in a navy jacket with a clipboard, appeared. She looked between the guards and David with concern. "What's happening here?" David gave her a polite smile. "Honestly, ma'am, we were just having lunch. These gentlemen decided they needed another conversation." The supervisor frowned. "I already heard about the issue at the shoe store. I thought that was cleared up." David nodded. It was. The supervisor turned to the guards, her tone firm. "Then there's no reason to bother these customers again. Go back to your post." The tall guard opened his mouth, then stopped when he saw her expression. "Yes, ma'am," he muttered and walked off. The younger guard followed quickly behind. When they were gone, the supervisor turned back to David. "I'm really sorry about that. We've had complaints about certain behavior before. I'll make sure this is handled." "Thank you," David said sincerely. After she left, Ryan let out a long breath. "Dad, what's wrong with that guy?" David looked at his son. "Some people think authority gives them power over others. But real authority comes from respect, not fear." Ryan nodded slowly. "You handled that way better than I could have." David smiled. "That's because I've learned when to fight and when not to." They sat for a while longer, letting things settle. Eventually, David suggested they head home. Ryan agreed, happy to leave the place behind. As they walked out of the mall, a few strangers nodded at David, offering quiet smiles. People who had seen what happened and respected how he handled it. Outside, the air felt cooler, lighter. David unlocked the truck and they climbed in. The drive was quiet for a few minutes until Ryan spoke again. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you were in the Marines, did stuff like that happen? People judging you before they even knew you?" David thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But most of the time, you learn not to care what people think. You focus on what's right, not what's easy." Ryan stared out the window. "I just don't get why some people act like that." David smiled softly. "Neither do I. But life has a funny way of teaching people lessons. Sooner or later, everyone gets reminded to be humble." They reached home just as the sun was setting. Ryan went inside to play video games while David stayed out for a moment, leaning against the truck. He watched the sky turn orange and pink, the world quieting down for the evening. But deep inside, David couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He had seen the look on that guard's face, the kind of stubborn pride that didn't let go easily. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He didn't want trouble. All he wanted was a peaceful life for his son. But sometimes trouble didn't ask permission before showing up. Later that night, as David sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend who worked part-time at the mall. "Hey, I saw the video going around. That guard messed with the wrong guy, huh?" David frowned. "Video?" He opened social media and searched. Within seconds, he saw it. A short clip taken by a bystander. It showed the shoe store argument from earlier that day. Him calm but firm. The guard loud and aggressive. And the caption read, "Dad stands up for his son, mall guards cross the line." There were hundreds of comments already. People praising how David stayed composed. Some even guessed he had military training just by the way he carried himself. He shook his head, half amused, half uneasy. He never wanted attention, and especially not like this. But he also knew things had a way of spreading fast online. Inside, Ryan came out of his room holding his phone. "Dad, you're on the internet!" David chuckled. "Yeah, I just saw. Everyone's talking about it. People are saying you handled it like a pro." David smiled. "Let's hope it stays just a story and not a problem." Ryan grinned. "You're kind of famous now." David laughed quietly. "I don't need fame. Just peace." But as the night grew darker, he couldn't shake the feeling that fame, and even accidental, sometimes brought the opposite of peace. And somewhere out there, he knew those guards had probably seen the same video too. Whatever came next, David decided, he would handle it the same way he handled everything else, with calm discipline, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd already faced much worse. The next morning, David woke up earlier than usual. The sun was barely up and the house was quiet. Ryan was still asleep, probably tired from all the excitement the day before. David made himself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window. He scrolled through his phone, hoping the online attention from yesterday had died down. But when he opened his messages, it was clear the story hadn't gone away. It had grown. There were hundreds of shares now. Comments poured in, people praising how he handled the situation with calm and dignity. Some even called him the dad everyone wishes they had. But mixed in were other kinds of messages. Reporters asking for interviews. Strangers sending friend requests, even people claiming to have been treated poorly by the same mall guards. David sighed. He didn't like attention, especially not this kind. He just wanted to live quietly, take care of his son, and stay out of trouble. As he scrolled, one message caught his eye. It was from an old friend, someone he hadn't talked to in years. The message read, "Saw the video, brother. You still got that Marine composure. Proud of you. Let's catch up sometime." David smiled faintly. He hadn't heard from anyone from his service days in a long time. It felt good to be remembered, but it also brought back memories he'd kept buried for years. He closed the phone and leaned back in his chair. The smell of coffee filled the room, and for a moment everything felt peaceful again. But that peace didn't last long. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the door. David opened it to find the mall supervisor standing there, holding a clipboard. She looked uneasy but polite. "Good morning," she said. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced." "I'm Lisa. We met briefly yesterday." David nodded. "Of course. Come in." She stepped inside, glancing around nervously. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday, and also about the video that's been circulating." David motioned for her to sit. "Go ahead," she took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize again. What those guards did was completely out of line. We're already reviewing their behavior and how they handled the situation." "I appreciate that," David said calmly. "There's something else," she continued. "The security company that manages our guards saw the video. They're not happy. They're trying to do damage control." David frowned slightly. "Damage control?" "Yes," she said. "Apparently the guards feel embarrassed. One of them claimed you were aggressive, that you intimidated them." David almost laughed, but his voice stayed even. "Intimidated? I asked them to stop accusing my son of something he didn't do." Lisa nodded quickly. "I know, I watched the footage myself. You were calm the whole time. That's why I wanted to warn you that they might try to twist the story to protect themselves." David's expression softened. "Thank you for letting me know." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "If you don't mind me asking, are you former military?" David gave a small smile. "Yes, Marine Corps, a long time ago." "I thought so," she said. "The way you spoke, the discipline, you kept control even when most people wouldn't." David chuckled lightly. "Old habits die hard." Lisa smiled too. "Well, I just wanted to say thank you. The way you handled yourself and your son, that made a big impression on a lot of people. I'll make sure the truth stays straight on our end." After she left, David stood by the door for a moment thinking. He didn't want this to turn into some public fight. But he also couldn't stand people twisting facts to save face. Later that day, Ryan came into the living room holding his phone. "Dad, you won't believe this. There's a news story about you." David raised an eyebrow. "A news story?" "Yeah," Ryan said, sitting beside him. "They're saying a veteran dad calmly stopped an unfair security confrontation. They even called you the calm Marine." David laughed softly. "That's a new one." Ryan grinned. "It's kind of awesome, though." David shook his head, smiling. "Maybe, but I hope it doesn't bring more attention." Unfortunately, it did. By evening, a local news van pulled up on their street. A young reporter knocked politely on the door. David answered, looking a bit surprised. "Mr. Miller?" the reporter asked. "We're doing a short piece on the mall incident. Would you be willing to share your side?" David sighed. He didn't really want to, but he also didn't want anyone else speaking for him. "All right," he said. "But I'm not looking for fame or trouble. I just want people to know what really happened." The reporter smiled gratefully. "Of course. That's all we want, too." The short interview went smoothly. David spoke simply, no drama, no blame, just facts. He explained how he had stayed calm for his son's sake, and hoped others would do the same in unfair situations. When the segment aired that night, people admired his humility even more. Comments poured in about his composure, his respect, and how he didn't respond to anger with anger. But not everyone was happy about it. At the mall, the two guards watched the same report from the security office. The younger one looked uncomfortable. "He's telling the truth," he said quietly. The taller guard didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his pride bruised. "Yeah, well, he made us look like fools." "You kind of made yourself look that way," the younger one muttered almost too softly to hear. The older guard glared at him. "Watch your mouth." That night, David sat on the porch again, looking out at the quiet street. The air was cool and the crickets chirped softly. Ryan came out and sat beside him. "Dad," he said, "you think those guards are still mad?" David nodded slightly. "Probably, but anger fades when truth stays standing. That's something life teaches you." Ryan looked thoughtful. "You always stay so calm." "I wish I could do that," David smiled. "You will. Calm doesn't mean weak, son. It means you're in control, not the world around you." Ryan nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. Inside the house, David's phone buzzed again. Another message from an old Marine buddy popped up. "Heard your story. You've still got that quiet strength, brother. Once a Marine, always a Marine." David smiled as he read it. He didn't need medals or recognition. Moments like this were enough. Knowing he'd handled things with honor, that his son had seen what real strength looked like, that was what mattered most. Still, deep inside, he knew the story wasn't over yet. Because pride, the kind that makes people refuse to admit when they're wrong, doesn't just disappear overnight. And David had a feeling that sooner or later, he'd be seeing those guards again. The following week started quietly for David and Ryan. The online buzz had started to calm down, and life was almost back to normal. David went back to his small job at the local auto shop, fixing engines and helping customers who appreciated his honest work. Ryan went to school like usual, though. His classmates kept talking about the video that had made his dad something of a local hero. But while things seemed peaceful, there was something uneasy beneath the surface. One afternoon, while David was working under a car hood, his phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. He wiped his hands on a rag before answering. "Hello? Is this David Miller?" A man's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Officer Green from the local precinct. Nothing to worry about. I just wanted to let you know that the mall management reached out. They're conducting a formal review about last week's incident. I'll probably need a short statement from you." David nodded, even though the officer couldn't see him. "Sure thing, officer. I'll help however I can." "Appreciate that," Green said kindly. "For what it's worth, everyone I've talked to says you handled it better than most would." "Thank you," David replied. "I just did what any parent would do." When he hung up, he felt a mix of relief and frustration. He didn't want this to drag on, but he also knew things like this took time to settle. That evening, Ryan came home holding a flyer he'd picked up on the way. "Dad, look, the mall's hosting some kind of community appreciation day this weekend. They're inviting local heroes and veterans. Think they'll invite you?" David chuckled. "I doubt it. I'm not a hero, son." Ryan shook his head. "You kind of are, though. You stayed calm when most people would have lost it. People need to see more of that." David smiled softly, but didn't answer. He didn't see himself as special, just a man trying to do what was right. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When David arrived at work, his boss handed him an envelope. "You got mail," he said with a grin. "Looks official." David opened it. Inside was a neatly folded letter with the mall's logo at the top. It read, "Dear Mr. Miller, we sincerely apologize for the unfortunate incident that occurred involving you and your son. After reviewing all available footage and speaking with witnesses, we have confirmed that you acted respectfully and appropriately. We would like to invite you to our upcoming Community Appreciation Day as a guest of honor, recognizing your calm leadership and service as a former Marine." At the bottom were several signatures, including that of the mall's general manager. David stared at it for a long moment. He hadn't expected that. He didn't even know they knew about his military background. When he got home that evening, he showed Ryan the letter. Ryan's eyes lit up. "Guest of honor? Dad, that's awesome." David laughed quietly. "It's just a small thing, but it's nice they're doing the right thing. Saturday came quicker than expected. The mall was decorated with banners, flags, and a small stage in the food court. Local businesses had set up booths, and a crowd gathered as families strolled around, eating, laughing, and enjoying the weekend. David wore a simple collared shirt and jeans. He didn't want attention, just to show respect. Ryan walked beside him, proud and smiling. When they arrived, Lisa, the mall supervisor, greeted them warmly. "David, I'm so glad you came. Thank you again for how you handled everything. You've set an example for a lot of people." David smiled politely. "I appreciate that, Lisa." She handed him a small card with his name on it. "You'll be called up soon for a short recognition speech. Don't worry, it's informal." David nodded, trying not to look nervous. He wasn't a man who liked speeches or attention. But for Ryan, he'd do it. As they waited, something caught his eye. Across the food court near the edge of the crowd stood the two security guards. They weren't in uniform this time. The younger one looked uneasy, while the older one stood stiffly, his face unreadable. David felt a brief twinge of discomfort but stayed calm. He wasn't there for a fight, only for closure. When the announcer finally called his name, the crowd clapped politely. David walked to the small stage and took the microphone. He looked out at the faces, parents, kids, workers, even the guards in the back, and smiled gently. "I'm not much of a speaker," he began, his voice steady, "but I just want to say thank you. What happened here last week could have gone a lot differently. I'm grateful it didn't." The audience listened quietly. "I served in the Marines for many years," he continued, "and if there's one thing I learned, it's that real strength doesn't come from force. It comes from control, from knowing when to stand tall and when to stay calm. My son saw something unfair happening, and I stood up for him. That's what any dad would do." Ryan smiled proudly from the front row. David went on, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. I hope this place, this community, remembers that respect should always come before judgment." When he finished, the crowd clapped, not loudly, but warmly. It was the kind of applause that carried gratitude, not just excitement. As he stepped down from the stage, Lisa shook his hand. "That was perfect," she said softly. Before David could reply, someone else approached, the younger security guard. He looked nervous but sincere. "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have spoken up that day. You didn't deserve what happened." David gave a small nod. "Thank you, that means a lot." The guard hesitated, then added quietly, "My partner's been having a hard time accepting it, but I think he knows he was wrong too." David smiled kindly. "We all have our pride. Sometimes it just takes a little longer to let go of it." A few minutes later, as David and Ryan walked toward the parking lot, they heard someone call out behind them. It was the older guard. He walked up slowly, his expression serious but not angry. "I saw your speech," he said. "You spoke well." "Thank you," David replied calmly. The guard paused. "Look, I handled things badly that day. I let my temper get ahead of my judgment. I shouldn't have spoken to your son like that." David looked at him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Apology accepted." The guard shook it, nodding once. "You've got a good kid, and you kept your cool better than I ever could have. Guess that Marine discipline never fades, huh?" David smiled. "Not if you keep practicing it." As they parted ways, Ryan looked up at his dad, beaming. "That was amazing, Dad. You didn't even have to say much, but everyone respected you." David put a hand on his shoulder. "Respect doesn't come from what you say, son. It comes from how you act, especially when things get tough." They walked toward their truck as the evening sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the parking lot. The air felt lighter now, as if a chapter had quietly closed. For the first time since that day at the mall, David felt true peace, not because people finally saw who he was, but because they saw what calm strength really looked like. And deep down, he knew that lesson would stay with his son long after the applause faded. A few weeks passed since the community event at the mall, and life finally began to settle again. The noise around the video and the incident faded, replaced by normal days filled with work, chores, and laughter at home. David liked it that way, quiet and simple. He never enjoyed being in the spotlight. To him, peace was worth more than recognition. But something had changed, not just around him, but inside him too. The experience reminded him of who he really was. Not just a mechanic, not just a single father, but a man who'd carried lessons from years of service into everyday life. Ryan had changed too. He seemed to look at his dad differently now, not just as a parent, but as someone to look up to. One Saturday morning, they were in the garage, fixing up an old bicycle Ryan had outgrown. The radio played softly in the background, and sunlight streamed through the open door. "Dad," Ryan said after a while. "You know what I've been thinking?" David glanced up. "What's that?" "That day at the mall. I was scared. But when I saw you staying calm, it made me feel safe. Like you already knew what was going to happen." David smiled, tightening a bolt on the bike wheel. "That's because I wasn't scared. I was just focused." Ryan tilted his head. "How do you do that? How do you stay calm when people are being unfair?" David paused for a moment, then set down his wrench. "It's something you learn over time. In the Marines, we had a saying, 'Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.' It means when you stay steady, you think clearer. Anger just makes things worse." Ryan nodded slowly, as if locking the words in his memory. "So, you weren't angry at those guards?" David thought about it. "I was disappointed, but anger doesn't fix things. Understanding does." Ryan smiled faintly. "I hope I can be like that when I grow up." "You will be," David said. "You already are." For a while, they worked in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between people who trust each other completely. Later that afternoon, their neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stopped by. He was holding a small box. "Hey, David," he said, smiling. "Got something for you." David looked surprised. "What's this?" "Just a little something from a few of us around town," Thompson said. "We wanted to say thanks. The way you handled everything. You reminded a lot of us what patience and respect look like. People don't forget that kind of thing." Inside the box was a small plaque that read, "In recognition of calm courage, David Miller." David blinked, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Thompson smiled. "Maybe not, but sometimes good examples deserve to be noticed." After he left, David stood there for a while, staring at the plaque. He wasn't used to being thanked for simply doing what he thought was right. Ryan came up beside him and grinned. "See, Dad? I told you people were proud of you." David smiled softly. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because that's what a dad's supposed to do." Ryan nodded. "Still, it's pretty cool." That evening, as the sun went down, David and Ryan sat on the porch again, their usual spot. The neighborhood was quiet and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. "Funny how things work out," David said after a while. "One small moment can teach a lot of people a big lesson." Ryan looked at him curiously. "What lesson do you think people learned?" David took a slow sip of his coffee. "That respect isn't about power. It's about treating people right even when you think you don't have to. Those guards learned it. The mall learned it. And maybe even a few folks watching online did too." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "You think they'll remember?" "Maybe," David said. "And if not, that's all right. What matters is you remember." Ryan smiled quietly, resting his head against the porch railing. "I won't forget." They sat there in silence for a few minutes, listening to the crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The world felt calm again, exactly how David liked it. After a while, Ryan spoke again. "Dad, do you ever miss the Marines?" David smiled, thinking back. "Sometimes. Not the danger, but the brotherhood. The sense that we were doing something bigger than ourselves. Do you ever wish you were still there?" He shook his head. "No, my mission now is here. I'm with you." Ryan smiled. "Good answer." They both laughed quietly. The next day, as David drove Ryan to school, a man at a red light in the next lane rolled down his window and called out, "Hey, you're that Marine dad, right? From the mall video?" David chuckled. "That's me." The man gave a thumbs up. "Good on you, sir. We need more people like you out there." David nodded politely. "Thank you. Have a good day." As the light turned green and they drove off, Ryan grinned. "You're famous, Dad." David smiled. "No, son. Just visible for a little while." When he dropped Ryan off, he watched him walk into school with a kind of confidence he hadn't seen before. Not pride, just quiet assurance. That's when David realized the whole thing, as messy as it was, had given his son something valuable. The understanding that calm doesn't mean weak, and dignity can be louder than anger. That evening after dinner, David pulled out an old wooden box from his closet. Inside were his Marine medals, photos, and a few worn letters from the past. Ryan sat beside him, eyes wide with curiosity. "I didn't know you had all this," Ryan said softly. "Most people don't," David replied. "These remind me where I came from, but you remind me where I'm going." Ryan smiled, his eyes glistening. "You're the best, Dad." David put an arm around him. "You make it easy to be." They sat there, the old memories mixing with new ones, the house filled with warmth and quiet pride. Over the next few months, life stayed peaceful. People still occasionally recognized David around town, but eventually the world moved on to the next story, as it always does. And that was just fine with him. One evening as he closed up the garage, he noticed the small plaque from his neighbors hanging neatly on the wall. The light from the setting sun caught it just right, and for a second, it glowed softly. David smiled to himself. "Calm courage," he whispered. "Not a bad thing to be remembered for." Inside, Ryan was at the kitchen table doing homework. When David walked in, he looked up and said, "Hey, Dad, want to quiz me on history?" David grinned. "Sure thing, champ, but only if it's about real heroes this time." Ryan laughed. "You mean like you?" David shook his head with a smile. "No, son. Like anyone who keeps doing the right thing, even when it's hard." And as the evening faded into quiet laughter and soft conversation, the world outside seemed calm again, the way it always should have been. Because sometimes life's strongest lessons don't come from battles or medals, but from simple moments when a person chooses patience over pride, peace over anger, and love over everything else. And for David, that was the kind of strength he wanted to pass on, one quiet day at a time.